Good morning, good evening to everyone, and welcome to this, the first in our series of webinars sponsored and driven by iGrafx. We really appreciate you all taking the time to join us for this, our first episode, where we're going to be talking about the topic of people first process management and how that's the driver for business value. So I'm Mark McGregor, and I'm going to be your host certainly for today's session, and may well even be for the next episodes coming up. And today I'm joined by Jason Bloomberg. So Jason, like me, has published a few books. I suspect he's probably sold a lot more books than I have, but I'm sure we won't go into it. But as we both know, books are like vanity projects. We write them because we've got something to say and we want to enjoy them and share them. If we wrote them to make money, then I think we go and find something else to do, like maybe flipping burgers in McDonald's, or at least in my case, maybe not for yours, Jason. So Jason's got many years of experience in working with users, vendors, in all sorts of different ways of looking at the technology and the application of technology. So like me, he's losing a little hair, so we've been around a little while, and the two of us have sort of known each other for many years, although never actually moved in the same circles. So Jason's going to be joining me in a little while, and I want to talk to him about the relevance of people, so the importance of people-centric in that digital world and that digital transformation. So we're going to talk a little bit about people-centric process management, and that's where I'm going to kick us off and sharing a little introduction. Then we're going to get some discussions going and some insights really from Jason and dig into further as to, well, what does it mean in today's world? And then I want to come back and just share with you all a little bit around the iGrafx Process 360 Live platform and how does that fit in that people-centric world. So for my own insights, I want to pick on stuff from I think it was the last book that I wrote with Ian Gott's, People-Centric Process Management, which is a pretty old book now in business book terms. It was over 12, 13 years ago that we wrote it. So the question, I guess, there's a couple of things. One, why did we write it? And two, who was it for and where did it fit in today's world? So part of the drivers for both Ian and myself is that we'd worked with some of these organizations, people like GE, Vodafone, DAL Group I worked with in Sudan, Future Group in India, so a whole bunch of things. And one thing that was interesting for both of us is that the more we worked with executives, the less interested they were in business process management, which didn't seem to make sense to us. And what they said was, it's just another buzzword. Hey, you know what? This again is IT trying to tell us how to run the business. And when we ask our people about it, they say, all right, what we need to do is to stop what we're doing, spend a fortune training people, buying tools, doing these things and analyzing the heck out of everything. And that could be okay, but what we found was that they were also saying, it didn't seem to line up with the goals and objectives that we had as a business from the leadership. And, the scariest thing, or one of the scariest things, was that everyone says, I want to take this to the top, we're going to take it to the CEO. And what they said was, well, it's a great idea, but it's one of 25 priorities. And at the end of the day, we can deal with the top 2, 3, maybe 4 initiatives. And the other question they had was that, is it really a passing fad? Which didn't make sense to Ian, it didn't really make sense to me until we dug a little deeper and realized that actually, largely driven by the US market, BPM had become synonymous with BPMS, and that people were confusing the practice of BPM with the implementation of business process management systems. So to look at stepping back from the technology, what we talked to people about was saying, well, actually, the funny thing is, you say that within your organization, you want to be more innovative, you want to be more creative. You need people working together as teams. You've got to get your processes sorted and you want to be more customer centric. the funny thing is that, gee, hang on a minute, aren't these all about people? And what we realize when we look at people like Toyota, for example, and large parts of GE, was that actually the focus was around the people. And if you focused on people and enabling people and supporting people and motivating them, then everything else just follows. So this was the driver behind the people-centric process management book. And we really were aimed probably more at an IT audience in trying to help them understand some of those change management initiatives. So for example, getting them to understand that everyone's needs are different. We've got the end users, we've got the business users, we've got the vendors and outsourcers, we've got the compliance teams, and all of these groups have a different requirement. And if we don't kind of understand those different requirements, then a little bit, as we say about from that end user point of view, we get that myopic approach. So we were looking and talking and sharing some ideas around, well, what can we do to be more people-centric? So we realized that for a lot of people, it was the, hey, I'm going to have the strategy. I'm going to set up this clarion call and I'm going to rally everyone and get them going rah, rah, rah. But it doesn't work. Someone else would say, yeah, but I've tried the burning platform, set a fire underneath and make sure that people run to somewhere else. And that didn't always work. Others said, well, hey, it needs to be a long, slow, steady march, step by step. And that can work. But as we show here in this simple graphic, what we're really saying is, it's not a case of taking the wrong approach. It's probably a case of using the wrong strategy at the wrong time. So in that ideal program, whether it's from a change management or a business process management perspective, then you need to use a mix of those strategies. And then the other part of it was helping people understand change. I mean, I'm sure most people on the call have seen some variant of the Scott and Jeff change curve. And it's incredible how many people say, well, hey, I just need you to commit to this, or, there's no denying we've got to change. So here's the new way of going. And I just want to jump you from deny to commit. And then we don't understand when people are down in the resisting box on the bottom left. And we don't have different strategies to how to help overcome and how to bring people through the exploration and then into the commit. And when you look at some of the techniques around lean, some of the techniques from GE workout and other similar things, you realize that actually those soft, fluffy workshops of putting post-it notes on a board that everyone says is a bad idea, they're too focused on whether they get the perfect process map. They don't realize that this is actually a great way of helping people go through and eliminating the resistance and exploring and committing to a new way of working. So these were the types of things that we were sharing, and also sharing a cycle for personal and effective process change. So taking people through the fact that if we want to get through that curve in a true process management session, then we'd go through the discovery, the analysis, the design, the validation, the implementation, integration, manage, and improve. Now, many of you on the call, I'm sure, will see people say, well, yeah, that's too complex. It's 8 steps, and I can do it in 3, and we can drop this and drop that and drop the other. And I wish you all the very best of luck. And I say that because this curve or this cycle is taken out of neuro-linguistic programming. Some of you may be familiar with it, many of you may not be. The work originally carried out with John Grinder and Richard Bandler, but most of you will have heard of people like Tony Robbins, or in the UK, people like Paul McKenna, and watched the most amazing transformations that those guys have done. And this is the cycle that people like that have used to transform the lives of millions of people around the globe. So I kind of figure if that's the process they use, then we'd be fools not to use it. So these were the sorts of tools that we were sharing in people-centric process management, with the aim of helping people focus more on the people, whether that's the team, the change team, whether that's the broader implementation team, understanding how to do that, or whether that's to get people engaged in process management and moving on to a better based approach. Because the alternatives and I like this quote from GuideSpark, where they illustrate that people like GE, Ford, Procter and Gamble, and others poured over 1.3 trillion. Let's pause. 1.3 trillion into transformation initiatives. And the statistics suggest that 70% or 900 billion went on failed or wasted programs. And as they dug in, the biggest issues were around communication of goals, strategy, purpose, and outlook with employees. The lack of communicating with and engaging with people. So that's the backdrop from my perspective. I'm an absolute out and out fan that smart people will always get around a dumb process. Your people are far more adept than you might realize, understanding that they only need to do it the new way while management's watching, because management will pretty soon go on to some new fad, a new way of thinking. And so I'm a real fan of anything to do with that. So I was really interested in connecting with Jason and talking with the iGrafx teams, when realizing that in the work that Jason's been doing, that people centricity has moved, if you like, out of that, hey, it's in that BPM bubble, getting people involved, having people thinking more about that, but actually going into that broader perspective and being every bit as true today in our digital business transformation, customer-centric world, and all those other buzzwords that we're using, and finding we still come back to the same thing of that people centricity. So I'm going to stop sharing in a moment, but just to give you all guys a flavor, the sorts of thing that Jason, I want to be talking to Jason about are how people overcome that resistance. Also, we want to talk a little bit about human to human. It's something that Jason and I spoke about a little bit before when we were lining this up. And how does H2H as a concept take over from those old phrases of B2B, B2C, etc., etc. What the people centricity means for digital journeys, and hopefully we can talk a little bit about the combination of journey and process modeling and why that comes in. So I'm going to just move on to here, and then I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then hopefully for you guys, then good news or bad news, you should just be having Jason and I pop up on your screens. Jason, so glad to have you with us today.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Great introductory remarks there, Mark.
So why don't you start by giving people a flavor of the research that you've been doing and the noodling that you've had that's brought you to the point of thinking, hey, you know what, people centricity could be the difference between success and amazing success, because let's not suggest that just because you don't take a people-centric approach that you can't succeed. You won't succeed as easily, and you may not be as well, but give us a flavor of where you're coming from and what you're seeing.
Well, what I've been focusing on for the last almost 10 years now is digital transformation. And digital transformation, right, it is a buzzword. It's now we're getting pretty tired of it, and it's sort of been laden with a lot of misunderstanding. So peeling back the layers a bit of what we mean by digital transformation, it's essentially business transformation that, yes, is software empowered, but is customer centric. So even though that word digital is in the phrase, it's not really about the technology. It is about the customer and how organizations need to realign their thinking and their processes to better meet customer needs. So within the context of your initial remarks, Mark, you were talking a lot about human centricity, and then you went into examples of process teams and other things. Basically, you were talking about employees within an organization. So what can people within an organization do to help transform that organization and its processes to better meet business goals? Well, digital transformation comes along and says, well, that's part of the story, but we can't put the organization at the center. We can't put departments or teams at the center. We have to put our customers at the center, and that's going to change the way we do business across the board. And that's really the core notion of digital transformation. Technology is obviously going to be a key enabler of that, but it's really about how we think about customers and how we serve customer needs. So once we do that, once we start thinking about customer centricity, we don't want it to be a buzzword. We want to actually put customers at the center of what we do. For example, how we go about thinking about processes. So if you take a particular process, it could be any process in your organization that needs work, and you're saying, well, how would we put the customer at the center of this process? What does it mean for that to be the case? Well, some sort of customer need, customer interaction is going to kick off the process, and then there's going to be interactions between customers as well as other people, employees of the organization or other third parties, that is going to now meet the needs of that customer. So we're still talking about employees, we're still talking about partners or other third parties that aren't customers, but what we're doing is we're saying those are a type of customer, right? Employees are a type of customer in that on the one hand, IT serves them as well as they serve customers, right? So they are essentially customers for the technology effort in the organization. But even more broadly, we want to democratize the experience of everybody, right? So it's not like the customer, the end user of your products or services is going to have an entirely different experience from the employees working internally. There should be some sort of commonality. You're going to be using the similar tools, similar processes, and a similar kind of experience. Because in many cases, depending upon the nature of your business, your employees are also your customers, right? If you're a bank, then your employees are going to bank with you, right? They're going to be customers as well. They're going to be using screens and other technologies either as part of their role as employees or part of their role as customers. And those experiences should be a coherent set of a consistent set of capabilities. So that's part of now the transformation effort, is how do we make that happen? How do we put customers at the center of everything we do, including how the employees within our organization work on a day-to-day basis? And that now informs all of these conversations about process and process transformation.
Wow, so many jumping off points there.
Yeah.
I've got to really be careful here. We try and stay on track, but I think that, for anyone on the call, I think one of the things I do want to absolutely jump out, be interested in your view, is I find it interesting in the work that I've done beyond the people-centric around customer excellence, is amazed at when people look at it, right, okay, so I need to get customer interactions, we need to start study groups and focus groups and all those other wonderful things, which have value. But I, like you, I think I'm always constantly amazed that banks in particular forget that their employees are customers too. And actually, if they really want to know the frustrations for many of their customers, they need go no further than ask their staff about their own experience in dealing with the company they work for. So I think, it's a really great reminder, isn't it, that so often our customers, our employees are customers too. But the other thing, and I'd be interested in your take on this, is that in the UK, and I think it's true in the US, I found it really frustrating with the mobile phone companies. I mean, there's lots of things to frustrate us, but the one that really gets me is when you go into a store because you've got a problem and you say to them, well, can you help me with this? And the first thing they do is they go to the same website, to your point, that the customer's got. And you say, well, I'm a pretty technically competent individual. If the answer was there in that system, I'd have already found it. So in one hand, so many organizations have said, well, we recognize that customers and employees can be sharing the same systems and experiences, but actually they've gone for like lowest common denominator. So now when we go into a store, often we just go into a web operator and we might as well go to a robot or ask Siri, because the actual employee has no access to information which isn't available to us and no knowledge base on which to go. And how do we reconcile that between actually making sure that the systems that we provide our employees with are added value, such that the customer believes that, hey, Jason gave me great service. I'm really glad I went to that store. I was having a problem and he solved it, as opposed to, why did I go into town all that way? That guy, Jason, he's clueless. He knows nothing.
Yeah, so this actually emphasizes the point I was making about how the old way of thinking about BPM is overly inward looking, right? The tunnel vision of focusing on employee processes, right? So the example you gave, They probably train their sales associates in the stores on how to answer customer problems. And so they probably have this step-by-step process that they expect people to go through, including going to the website and doing the searches. And the people they hire are, not particularly bright, so they have to go to the very basic level. But it's all focused on that employee and how they're working, right? It's not focusing on the customer and what the customer needs, right? So the customer process, they don't really think of it as a process, right? It's basically the customer comes in and asks for something, and that's kicks off some sort of employee process. Well, a digitally transformed way of looking at it is saying, well, it's all about the customer. This is only a customer process. And in fact, we're going to call it a customer journey. So this word customer journey, or what we like to say digital journey, sort of broadly speaking, is a new way of thinking. Well, new, I should say, it's a dozen years old, but it's a revamped way of thinking about how we're going to approach processes. Because a journey, a customer journey in particular, is really about the various steps a customer might go through interacting with a company throughout the lifetime of the customer, right? So it's not just about the customer coming into a store with a problem. It's about everything that customer does as they work with the company. So they may be looking at sales material, they may be looking at advertising, they may be doing sales research on the website, they may make the purchasing decision, and the purchasing process is part of the story. But it's only one step in a much longer journey. Right, so after the sales process, there might be after sales support, there may be upgrades or upsell or cross-sell opportunities, there may be warranty support or returns, there may be additional marketing the company wants to do, and various different support activities that they may want to undergo in order to better help that customer achieve its goals with the company. So what's the result of all this? Well, the customer is going to be delighted. They have this great experience with this company and its products. The customer is going to buy more, right? So from the company perspective, the customer has a higher lifetime value, and that's often the goal, especially a business consumer, but even in the business-to-business context where the customer is a business now consisting of many different individuals who may have different journeys as they interact in a business-to-business context, it's a bit more complicated, but it still follows the same principles, right? It's still about focusing on that individual customer, that human being, and what they need to do as they go throughout this customer journey. So from a BPM perspective, a customer journey it's sort of hard to fit into the whole BPM way of thinking, right? Because you can draw boxes and lines on a whiteboard or in a modeling tool, but customers are fickle, right? They change their mind. They're all different. They're subject to the whims of influence, right? They're influenced by advertising. They're influenced by competitive pressures, by economic pressures, right? All these different forces of change impacting the way customers behave. And so rising to the challenge is very different from traditional BPM. And this is part of why you had this disconnect between the practice of BPM, which was very sort of insular and part of the way the employees dealt with employee problems, and the BPMS, the business process management systems, which today are also not up to the task of supporting customer journey. So there's a whole range of different kinds of technologies now that support different parts of the customer journey. Some do it better, some not so well. But it's an entirely different world from 20 years ago, where it was a question of how do we create modeling tools to support the BPM effort, and then how do we build some early automation tools, where we've gone well past it from there. But the fundamental difference is really thinking of customer journeys as the core type of process, and rethinking now what we need to think of as a process in order to support better customer experience and better lifetime value of the customer. So it goes right to the bottom line of the company in the end.
So totally agree, and this was anyone on the call knows this is a topic that I'm passionate about in terms of taking that journey-based approach. Okay, the only difference for me is in language, is just to separate the word journey from the word customer, just to remind people that the journey-based approach, can apply to citizens, it can apply to employees, it can apply to products, it can apply to users or customers. But absolutely with you that so agreeing that actually, rather than arguing about whether it's a level 0 process map or a value chain or any of those things, I think that we have both agreed that current thinking says actually the high level view, whatever you want to call, whether you're coming from customers, citizens, employees, is understanding their journeys and looking to either remove pain, delight them, or understand the context of the journey. Now, the other thing I'm going to feed you in, so it's you that's talking, not me. But when we were talking beforehand, we were both, I think, pretty passionate about the misconception, shall we say, or misapplication of the concept of journey by, and let's keep to the banking system or loans processing, where we were looking at we were both laughing about how most loan organizers assume that the journey starts with a loan application and finishes when the money, assuming the money's paid out. They have no concept that said, no, that was part of your or my journey for moving house. And that what they risk doing is actually just relabeling almost the level 0 internal view and calling it a journey, as opposed to understanding those broader journeys. So, I mean, particularly when we're looking at that new digital world, and you mentioned the browsing, and the browsing is not necessarily browsing within your system, it's browsing somewhere else. And I don't know, maybe I'm browsing reviews of the iPhone 14 because it's fashionable now. Maybe I go looking on the Apple website and I go buy from my local retailer. But that's all part of the journey, right? So when we're looking at that digital lens, that digital transformation lens that you spend a lot of time, how do we get ourselves thinking and understanding better those end-to-end journeys?
Yeah, that's a very important point and an important challenge. And I have an interesting story that connects to this, right? There's this old saying, I forget who it was, some management consultant, you may know his name, who basically pointed out that when people, let's say you have a person, a consumer goes into a hardware store and wants to buy a drill. It's like, well, they don't want the drill, they want the hole, right? They want to hang up a picture, so they want to drill a hole. And so it's not that they want the drill, you want the hole. And so part of the challenge is saying, well, it's not about buying drills, it's about drilling holes. And the drill is a means to an end. That's actually incorrect, right? Because they don't want a hole. Who wants a hole? Nobody wants a hole, right? They want to hang up the picture, but that's not the consumer's end goal either. What's the picture of? Well, it's a picture of their parents or whatever, right? And so why would somebody want to hang up a picture of their dead parents? It's like because they get an emotional experience seeing the picture of their parents, right? And that's the consumer goal, is the emotional experience, right? And it's very difficult for companies to understand that if they're selling a product or a service, especially to consumers, it's not about the product or the service, or about if the customer wants the product or the service. It's about the emotional response, the emotional context of buying or having that product or service, right? And that's what drives consumer behavior, right? We as consumers are driven by our feelings and our needs and our desires, not the fact that we might want a hole in the wall, right? That's not why I want to make a purchase, or why I'd be happy with a drill. I'm gonna be happy with a drill if I enjoy having the picture of my parents on the wall, because I have a connection to the picture. So this gets to the heart of what it means to achieve customer success in an organization, right? If you're serving consumers, you can measure customer success by measuring the positive emotional reaction, that is the customer delight in the experience you're providing. Not net promoter score, right? It's more difficult to measure, but it's about customer delight. Now, business to business is a bit trickier, right? Because business to business is really about helping your customer achieve its business goals, right? But every business to business chain, right? A business serving another business, eventually ends up at a consumer, right? So business to business, it might be B to B to C, or maybe there's more links in the chain, but eventually a business is serving consumers. And so the buck stops with the emotional experience of the consumer customer at the end of this chain. So if you think about the business to business link, well, a business is successful serving its customer, its business customer, if it is empowering its business customer to be successful in achieving its goals. And you have this little recursive pattern, right? If you're serving a B2C company, you're successful. That is, the B2B company is successful if the B2C company is able to get the positive emotional reaction out of its customers. And that's what you have to measure. So it's very different from traditional customer success metrics. So customer success originally sort of came out of industries that were subject to churn. You mentioned mobile phones, right? So customer churn, right? Customers sign up and then they have a bad experience and they leave, right? So that's customer churn. And any kind of company where it's easy for customers to leave experiences a lot of churn because they all suck. Everybody hates their cable company. Well, cable companies have a bit more. It's a bit harder to leave because it's usually only one choice. But mobile phone companies, we can easily leave and pick a different one. So churn is a problem. So the customer success team came in and said, well, what can we do to reduce churn? And they instituted ways to essentially spend as little money on convincing customers not to leave as possible, right? Because they wanted to reduce churn on a budget, right? So they had two priorities, right? Keep customers from leaving, but don't spend any more money than you have to. Makes sense, right? Except when you think about now who you end up with as customers. You end up with customers who are very pissed off with you, but not quite pissed off with you enough to quit, right? But they're all pissed off, right? They all hate you. They just don't quite hate you well enough to quit, And so you end up with a bunch of unhappy customers. So that's the challenge. How do we actually rethink that customer success approach so that we end up with happy customers, right? And this is this way of, by approaching the emotional experience of the end consumer and then making sure all the business-to-business links are empowering their customers to achieve this. That's the way to make it work. So I'll leave you with this one thought exercise. The companies that get this understand that if they email a customer, they are happy to get a response to that email because they want to interact with their customers, because interacting with their customers, listening to their customers, making their customers feel heard is part of delighting their customers. So how many of you out there have ever received an email from a company that says, do not reply to this email, this address is not monitored? We all have, right? It's like the norm. Why would a company ever send an email like that to a customer saying, I don't want to talk to you. You're not important enough to me for me to even listen to you, let alone understand your problem and try to do something about it. I don't even want to get your emails, let alone reply to them or read them, right? So any company that has not thought through that does not get this notion of digital transformation and the power of delighting customers. So, and that's just one example. That's just the email reply. Just don't get me started on virtual assistants.
Yeah.
You can go there if you want, but I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, so I think there's four things jump out at me. I'll start with your back one. I like that one about the broadcast email. Contrast that with sports. And I'll use Formula One because it's very topical here in Europe. But there is an organization that's recognized they need to go from broadcasting races to finding ways of having the fans engage during the race, right? The same goes for other sports. So the very people that took and made the most money out of broadcast recognize broadcast isn't the way. How do I get a dialogue going? If I want to keep my audience, I'm going to get a dialogue going. So to your point, everyone else there in business thinks they're so smart that they can be clever by moving into the broadcast space at the point where broadcast is going interactive. They've already moved on from that. So it's like we're 3 steps behind. I think the other one I wanted to share, and you again, a bit like you're drilling holes, this is an old story, an anecdote, but you were talking about the business and consumer. And the theoretical story goes that when GE selling MRI scanners up against Siemens and Philips and everybody else would go into a hospital, they said, well, okay, so Mr. Administrator, so it's not about buying an MRI scanner. Let me ask you the question. If you could see twice as many patients, and if you could do these things, what would it do for the business of healthcare? Oh, well, that's what we can do for you. And so they stopped trying to sell the product, an MRI scanner, and were focusing on talking to the customer about the outcomes and what the emotional difference would be. Wow, you could get a better, more accurate diagnosis. Well, how would your patients feel about that? Wow, would you feel good? Yeah, I'm going to feel good. Well, imagine how good you're going to feel with our scanner. And suddenly scanner sales go through the roof. No one's debating whether it's a better product or a worse product than the competitors, but it changed the conversation. And I just wanted to rewind back on that a little bit. I talked in the intro there about the human to human. And I think that I'd like people to really have in their mind that even if X company is selling to Y company, they're not. There is no such thing. A company is, in a perfect world, a collection of individuals all sharing a common objective and common goal in wanting to go forward. It's a group of people. Therefore, there's an emotional aspect to it. So on one hand, even our buyers, so the buyers that give us all grief, looking for bigger discounts, they've got an emotional need. Do we understand what their emotional need is? How would they feel if, could I make this? Wow, yeah. Well, you know what? The more we understand their emotions in that journey, at the same time, understanding the emotions of our own people, having to say, no, I'm sorry, we don't do that. No, you don't qualify for that. No, actually, no isn't a very good word. So how does our employee feel at the end of the day, having to say no all day? Not very good. Okay, well, you know what? That's going to come across to the customers. So how do we make sure that the employees, I mean, I'm sure, it doesn't look true from the way that Virgin behave as a group, right? But Richard Branson is well known for making the joke that my customers aren't the most important thing for my organization, my people are. Now, we can all get into that interesting thing that says, well, without customers, you wouldn't need people. But we can take on the sentiment and say, well, actually, I do need to keep my people happy because otherwise they won't be keeping the customers happy.
Right.
And then the other one that, and you saw me bashing my head as well, is that NPS stuff. I mean, how many times do you get an email, rate us out? I've got a belief that the only people that fill in those forms are people that are, I'm going to say, older people with nothing to do that feel that nice man deserves me to fill in the form. So you get self-fulfilling, everyone was happy. Those of us that weren't happy, the likes of the Jasons and I, we're more likely to say, I don't give you free consulting. And we are going to go out and tell everyone why we had a lousy experience and you didn't record it in your system because there was no way of capturing it because you were limited to your forms. However, using your example, if I had that great experience because I got what I asked for when I asked for it, you don't need to ask me how I feel. You already know. So if we move to the outcome-based stuff and our measurement system is, did we deliver the agreed product service on time, at price, etc.? Yes. Well, we don't need to ask anyone. We already know. There's nothing. We could ask them that other question, I guess. Is there anything else that we could have done to make your experience even better? Then we're going to get some useful feedback. But by the way, psychologically, we've just told them how good they feel, which never does any harm. So, I think that there's a bunch of those things where we can be a lot smarter, and remembering that everyone is there. So in your experience, tough question, what do you suggest is the quickest way that organizations can improve experiences and delight both customers and employees?
Well, a very important question, and there are many. I could give many different answers, but one of the topics we were going to discuss on this call was the notion of human to human, and I think this is a key part of the story, right? Because especially for large companies, they really struggle with any kind of human to human interaction because they see such interactions as being expensive. Right? They don't want people calling into the call center and talking to a human because if they can use technology instead, they're going to save money, right? And that's sort of the mentality. So whether it's the email that you can't respond to, or you call into the phone system and you get some sort of computer as opposed to a human being, or whatever the interaction is, big companies think that is going to improve their bottom line to essentially avoid human-to-human interactions whenever possible in order to reduce costs and to take a small team of customer service reps and spread them out so that they can serve more customer needs for a given dollar, right? So in many cases, though, that backfires because you end up with a bad customer experience, and that backfires, right? That leads to a smaller share of wallet, that leads to higher churn, that leads to a lower lifetime value from those customers, and yes, bad NPS scores, right? So eventually you're going to measure that these customers are unhappy if they ever fill in the damn survey, which because you're automating that, you don't even know if you're getting good results, right? If you had a human-to-human interaction, as you say, collecting that information, then you might have a better result. So I gave the example of the email, the no response email as a bad, as an anti-pattern, right? A bad practice. Another bad practice, and this is something that is very popular today, is this use of these artificial intelligence, AI-driven virtual assistants, right? So we've all interacted with these. You call a company on the phone and you get this human-like voice, sounds very friendly, and it's like, in a few words, describe your problem, and then in a few words, describe a problem. Maybe they send you to the right place or ask you a coherent response. More often than not, though, they send you to the wrong place, or they just say they don't understand, right? Because the AI is not 100%. If you're like me, I would only call a company if I can't solve the problem some other way, right? If I can't solve it online, if I'm stuck with online or with a mobile app, then I call. So I always call with problems that as an AI routine can't solve, right? So I need to talk to a human, and these AI routines are now just in my way, right? They're just there to piss me off. They're just there to slow me down. They're just there to keep me from talking to the person I need to talk to who can solve the problem, right? And that's not a positive thing. So why do companies even have those? Well, they figure that they're going to lower costs while still keeping customers reasonably satisfied because they have this human-like interaction. These are not human-like interactions. These are interactions with computers that sound a little like people and that doesn't fool anybody. Now, does that mean as a consumer I never want to talk to AI? That's not true, right? I have Android, and I use the Google AI, the equivalent to Siri, on a regular basis because in many cases it's a faster, more streamlined way to get the information I want, right? I can do a search on Wikipedia simply by asking a question, and it knows to look on Wikipedia, it will give me the answer, or I can simply ask it a math question. It's easier than typing in, using it as a calculator, and it's very simple and straightforward. And most of the time it works, or I can ask for directions, it knows to bring up the map and it gives me directions, right? So if AI makes the customer experience better, then I'm all for it. But so many companies make the mistake of using AI or any of these other quote unquote digital technologies to theoretically make the customer experience better, but in reality makes it worse, but maybe saves them some money until they figure out the total lifetime value of that customer, and then they're just shooting themselves in the foot, right? And this is one of the challenges with digital transformation is it's hard to get it right. Companies have to say, wait a minute, there are reasons to spend extra money on better customer support, on better customer interaction, because it's going to pay off in the end. And yes, that means staffing a larger call center. Yes, it means making sure the call center reps are fully trained and empowered to solve customer problems the first time, so that they don't have to transfer you to somebody else. Right? Another huge mistake companies make, it's like the person answering the phone can only answer very simple questions, but has to send them to somebody else. That shouldn't happen, right? Everybody answers the phone should be able to solve the problem, at least most of the time. Obviously, there'll be a few that stump them, but far more than they can today. So there's some of these basic steps that are human-to-human processes that can be improved within the context of digital transformation and digital journeys. You're right, the customer journey is a type of journey. We call the whole family a digital journey. And it takes that digital journey perspective, which puts the human being at the center, whether it's a customer, employee, partner, citizen, depending upon the context, but it's still a human being at the center. And if we think that way, then yes, we'll be able to call companies and get a person on the phone in a few seconds, not 45 minutes later, who can actually solve the problem because they know I wouldn't be calling unless it was a problem I needed a human to solve. And if I get an email from a company, it should have a way to respond to it that a human being will be able to respond to. Now, can companies get this right? Absolutely. There's some great examples out there of companies, especially who use social media. So a big company can use social media well or poorly, and I've seen both, right? So poorly, they have this social media external team. Sometimes they outsource it, and they just have a bunch of scripts they go through, and it's like, you say you have a problem, and they'll say this, and it's a very sort of rote, but they can't really solve any problems any better than anybody else. But some companies do it really well, where they have human beings who know what they're doing, understand the business and their customers. And if somebody asks a question on Twitter or Facebook, whatever it is, a human being actually responds and helps to solve the problem and gets them to the person that needs to solve the problem and can solve their problems for them or answer the questions or whatever the situation is. And because it's social media, you end up building these special relationships with customers, between the company and the customer. So one company that I have to give props to, I love them, is, well, two of them actually. There's Royal Caribbean Cruise Line, Delta Airlines. They both do great. If you have a question, you put it on social media, they will answer it. Now, both companies have their issues as well. They deal with a lot of customers, and calling them can be a nightmare. So they still have things to work on. But their social media is a great instance of big companies actually doing something right for consumers.
Cool. Well, listen, we've got a whole bunch of questions coming in. So if you could do me a favor and stay on the line, and then we will see whether we can get through to some of the questions. But one of the things that's great that's come in, and it's a great one for me to be posing at you potentially, so you can have a think about this while I move us on, because usually it's posed at me, which is, hey, we're talking about change and journeys and outcomes and experiences. Does this mean that automation isn't important and it's all the other stuff? So have a little ponder on that for those that are thinking that we are not fans of automation, and we're suggesting it's not about automation, it's all about human centricity, and see how that one pans out. So have a noodle on that one.
Yeah, well,
I said, if you have a noodle on that, I want to jump us into give us an overview on the iGrafx piece of the jigsaw.
Oh yeah,
and then hopefully we'll be able to come back and use whatever time that we can create at the end. Okay, so you can do me a favor as my thing to just make sure that it says, there we go. Just out of interest, Jason, you can see my screen again now?
I see a screen, but it's mostly white.
That's okay, because white was the screen I had. Okay. It was the blank screen while we were talking.
I can see. Now I can
okay, see. Brilliant. So I want to take a few minutes now of bringing some of those things together, and basically, it's an old saying that a fool with a tool is still a fool. We need the right tools for the job, and so often when we're looking at technology, it doesn't matter whether it's the modeling or the automation or the analysis. It's not that the tool's bad, it's just that we're using it in the wrong way. It's a bit like methodologies, whether it's Lean, Six Sigma, whatever. You need a blend. So I suggest that whether from an employee, citizen, customer perspective, change and automation is largely carried out still by people and impacts positively or negatively those people's experiences that Jason was talking about. So when we're looking at a platform, then I like to look, and this is my perspective on the iGrafx platform, as being like a layer cake. So we've got a discovery layer, an analysis layer, a design layer, yes, the automation, the management after we've started to automate to make sure we're getting it, and the optimizing. So I just want to talk through from the iGrafx perspective what that means. So if we look at the lower layer cake, then we're looking at discovery. So there's a whole bunch of things there. So how are we going to do discovery? Well, we can do discovery in the modern way through mining, whether that's process mining, task mining, journey mining, or decision mining. The cautionary note, touching back on what Jason was saying, is remember when we're using technology like process mining for journey mining, we're only discovering the digital traces within our organization. So don't think when you've created that customer journey through a mined approach that you really have the true end-to-end journey. But you certainly will get the electronic journey through your organization for a customer from that perspective. The other thing that I personally like in terms of some of the stuff that iGrafx says, I talk about it as needing to combine facts and feelings when we get to discovery. So it's not all about the technology. We do still need to interview people and ask people. So things like Quick Map that says, I don't need to draw a process model. I can give you a list of things that says, well, there's this, then that, then the other. And the tool gives me the model, because I don't want to be a process expert. I don't want to be a process modeler. The fact that we can collaborate, that we can bring it up and we can work on those things in real time, I think is significant in supporting those people-based approaches both. So if we look at that from a discovery, we can be looking at the people-centric, human-centric, both from an inside the changing group, outside to the broader employee group, and then all the way up to the outside of the organization through the use of journeys. Through analysis, then yeah, we can obviously do some of the stuff around time, cost, and resource. And I think this is really important because we need to look at those in the context of strategy. Jason touched upon it. All too often, it looks a great idea to either outsource or digitize the customer contact center because I've had a little look and I've fixed the time, cost, and resource. Great, I'm going to automate. But actually, I haven't necessarily looked at that in the context of the overall business strategy. And one of the words of caution I would share, this came from a bank down South Africa years ago, and a vendor was kind of bashing his head because it was one of their customers got up to speak and said, you know, if you're putting in the system to replace people, don't do it. Because what you'll find is that you spend the money on the system and then management don't want to let go of the people. So now you're paying for the people that did do the work and the machine that's now doing it. So just be careful. But other things that we need to be understanding is that variation. We need to be careful around the risks, because many of the poor decisions that we make are because we put in a system because there was a risk that someone did it wrong. So we can cover things like variation in performance. We can look at conformance where it's necessary, because not all areas is it necessary. So these are some of the, I'm just highlighting some of the things that I think are supporting this style of approach. And then we come on to the design. Well, as I've discussed, we need to be connecting those future states, as we talked about, to those business outcomes, which can be customer outcomes, they can be employee outcomes. They're all variants of a business outcome. But if we're not connecting the future states to those outcomes, whether that's through an emotional connect or not, then we're missing the real opportunity. Because quite frankly, more often than not, in my experience, digitizing is just about doing the same thing digitally. It didn't actually improve the business whatsoever. And all too often, when people talk about digitalizing, they're not. They're just simply digitizing. And the worst thing about that is if you take a bad process and digitize it, no one ever knows how to start taking out the fat and removing it. So just something to be careful with there. So we've got all those options there within the platform. And then to that automation, and Jason touched on it here, and I think that for me, and anyone that knows me knows that I'm a real fan of the analysis and design tools being separate from most of the automation, because I don't believe there's a single way of automating. You know, I think it's normal to have some stuff that you might want to put out and work for in, say, conversational AI. It's normal to want to do stuff in RPA. It's normal to want to connect to an ERP or a BPMS, etc. I just highlight the human-centric workflow engine here from an iGrafx point of view, because that's as much as anything that says, well, actually, there's a workflow in process management and process improvement. Gee, well, actually, maybe we need a better workflow for managing that, which of course is human-centric. So that's part of the platform. But I'm a real believer that we need to make sure that we're not assuming that the screw looks like a nail and getting a hammer for it. And I think this was part of the problem with a lot of the BPMS implementations of the early 2000s. They were like accidents looking for somewhere to happen. It didn't matter what you said the problem was, the BPMS will solve that. BPMS will solve that. And people were running around the business looking for problems. There weren't problems there, but they were looking for them to try and sell the way of doing it. But I think now, as we, I talked about the combining the facts with feelings, it is a fact that more and more of the work that we're doing in the enterprise is being done in some way, shape, or form by systems. And we do still need to be treating those. I mean, I did a presentation some years ago, which was called around HR for robots. So I was reminding people, I said, look, if we're going to replace people with a robot, then don't we need the same treatment for them? Don't we need to give them an appraisal? Don't we need to run performance management of them? How did we train them? What happens when we retire the robot and have to bring in a new one? And actually, if you think about it, a lot of the ways that you treat employees is the way that you would treat bots. And to do that, we need some degree of process monitoring. And by the way, just as an aside, for me, process monitoring and the predictive stuff around process improvement is more value from process mining than the initial discovery part that everyone focuses on, because I think that process monitoring is likely to be the continuous process improvement for the 21st century, because we haven't got anyone to ask. You know, R2D2 and C3PO are not too good in my interactive workshops. They don't seem to say a lot, and they love to give me that silent routine, the if you said so. And then lastly, as I talked about there, from the optimization, that process monitoring from an optimization point of view, automating the continuous process improvement, getting more into the predictive analytics, getting more into the governance, and all of these areas are covered within that single platform. So I think that it's a great platform from what the guys have been showing me in terms of, hey, how do I connect facts with feelings? How do I provide an environment or platform that will support people taking it from strategies, goals, and objectives through journeys, then through into the processes and decisions that support those journeys? Just as an aside, and you know, we'll get a couple of minutes and come back with Jason, but something else I'd be interested to see what his view. I believe that what I'm seeing is that once people take that journey-based approach, what they realize is most of the problems are caused by decisions. And they tend to be legacy decisions, like, oh, you need to get a manager to sign off on anything under $10 for expenses, or you've got to have receipts for everything under $5. Well, inflation has done an awful lot since that rule was put in the 1990s. Changing those rules where you can actually delight an awful lot more employees and customers, and you didn't actually wind up needing to change a thing. And the other thing that the approach will highlight, which really does the brains in for many process people, is recognizing that actually one interaction may mean that the customer or employee is interacting with 5 or 6 different processes. There is not a one-to-one mapping. Often there are multiple processes at a single customer interaction or touch point. And when we see that, then we can surely realize that, aha, that's why there's likely to be some frustration. I love the quote that someone gave me that said, easy enough, and this was from an iGrafx customer, so I claim no ownership of this line. Easy for occasional users and powerful enough for our expert users. You guys are doing a great job at helping us empower our people and bring models to life, which I thought was a pretty strong testament. So a couple of customer stories that I have the pleasure of knowing a couple of these customers. And by the way, I'm sure the guys in the post-event email will share the slides with you. So you know, what you're not going to be able to read on the screen, don't worry about it. You'll have plenty of time to read those at your leisure. But you know, great example there from Cox, where they found that switching from that process mindset to the journey mindset that Jason was talking about dropped so many benefits they weren't expecting. Gee, it helped us better prioritize process improvements. Wow, when we focused our efforts on the pain points with the most pain, we got the biggest bang for our buck. Hey, and the fact that we can connect and synchronize the journeys and the process views is something we weren't able to see before. Now, as you can see, here is an example where actually the end thing that came out of some of that work that they did was actually deploying some automation and an e-signature solution. Doesn't sound particularly startling, but to Jason's point, by putting in the automation in that context, they reduced by 20% redundant touch points. I mean, it doesn't need to go on to the rest of that bullet point on the right, does it? Saying improving customer experience. We just know that that must have improved the customer experience. 1,500% in ROI in year one. And of course, one of the other things many people don't measure when they're looking at these things is if you're in a growing business, it isn't the year one, but think about the fact if you don't fix the problem, how much is it going to be costing you in year 3, year 5? So the cost of doing nothing is often underestimated. And Cox have done a lot of great work in a number of different areas, but that one was one that interested me. The other one that I like is the story of B. Braun. So some of you may or may not know B. Braun. They do lots of stuff in the medical area, but they are a great story of the power of transforming lives. Imagine that, and you may know someone with kidney problems and needing having to go to a renal center, getting blood changed on a regular basis. How hard is it to go on vacation? You know, when you need those things. They came up with an idea that, well, actually, we can create a network of renal centers all over the world where we can take your treatment plan and we can share that. You say you want to go to Cancun on vacation, no problem. We've got a local center in Cancun. We can organize it such that all of your needs for dialysis are going to be ready. They're going to know what drugs, what needles, etc., etc. So go on vacation, go enjoy, have a great vacation. I mean, isn't that what we should all be thinking about? You know, whether we're talking about process management, whether we're talking about customer experiences, digital transformation, they're all abstract terms, really, aren't they? When actually what we need to be thinking about is, wow, what could we do to transform people's lives? And on that note, I want to read an extract from literally the last couple of paragraphs of the book that Ian and I wrote. And it's as true today as when we wrote it in 2010. Our hope is that as you go forward in your business, you will try harder to ensure that the systems you build or the processes you implement will help people achieve their dreams, to realize their goals and fulfill their ambitions. Because we're at a turning point where the technology we create needs to focus more on enabling us to do things we hadn't even thought of or dreamed of, rather than just simply automating what we already know or we already do. Because it's the former that's going to lead our businesses forward with renewed prosperity, and the latter will see us continuing to spiral downwards to the point of non-existence. We, like you, are people too. We share similar hopes, fears, and emotions. All any of us want at a personal level, at that human level, is to be able to feed, care for our families and friends, and to live happy, healthy lives. So as you go on your process journey or digital transformation journey, all we ask is that you think about the impact of the changes you make on the lives of others, and how through your own work, you can enrich your own life and the lives of the people around you. Okay, so I know we're overrunning slightly, but for those of you that are kind enough to be staying with us, and because the recording is going to be available for others, I want to come back a couple of things and have Jason come back and make any comments on the automation question that I posed to you, Jason. And maybe you've got a few closing words that you'd like to share. I'm going to leave this slide up, and for anyone that's interested, and I hope that's all of you, I'm going to post a link in the chat to the second episode, which will be coming up next month, where I'm going to be talking with Roland Walt about the topic of process mining and how to deliver effective process mining projects. So, Jason.
Yeah, you asked whether the human-to-human approach we've been discussing is contrary to automation, right? You would think that the more you automate, the less human-to-human you are, but that's actually not the way it works. In fact, supporting these digital transformation goals, this customer-centric goal, in large part depends upon automation, because there'd be no other way to achieve these levels of human centricity without it. So if you think about my example of, calling a company, if I call a company, it's because I have a problem I can't solve otherwise, and I want a human being who can actually solve it. Well, that solving the problem otherwise is the key to keeping the cost down for the organization. It's not putting untrained people on the call who are commissioned to keep calls short. No, it's about making sure the automation part of the story before I even make the call is as sophisticated and as customer-centric as possible, right? So if I have some sort of more process-oriented problem, let's say I'm applying for a mortgage, right? Last time I applied for a mortgage, it was very phone call centric, very paperwork centric, took weeks, right? And obviously there are companies that are improving that. But if I were dealing with sort of a digital approach to getting a mortgage, I would want most of that to be automated. Where if I have to call somebody because there's a problem, it's a rare occasion. But if I do have to do that, I can get the answer or solve the problem that I need to have solved. But the automation makes that cost effective, right? And that is a critical part of achieving the goals of digital transformation at scale for organizations who now have to figure out how to put all this together and remain customer centric, even though they're very large organizations with many hundreds of thousands of customers. So the final note I want to make is, as you're going through the iGrafx story, you have to keep in mind you're really talking about human activities, right? Human activities of the modelers, of the analysts, of the people who are working to understand how to achieve the process goals of the organization. Those are humans undergoing human activities as well. So if you look at a tool like iGrafx, it's not just about improving the processes that are being modeled, it's also about improving the processes that the modelers and the other people using the tool themselves have to go through. And that's a critical part of the story as well, and a critical part of the digital transformation story. But it's not just about, here's technology and the technology we're going to apply to help people get what they need to get done. It's about, here's the technology and people have to use that technology in order to achieve the goals of the organization. And we want those people to be delighted with their work and their day-to-day lives as well. So there's always two sides of this story, of the automation story, because it's not just about what's being automated, it's also about the people creating and managing the automations as well.
Love it. People helping people.
As you say, that's
people.
what business is, right?
Wonderful. Well, listen, Jason, I know we've overrun. I apologize to people on the call, but we knew this was going to be a problem, right? Because when we had our discussion, we said that we could go for 4 hours just easily without a script. There's so much else that
We're not going to, don't worry.
Yeah, I was going to say. So thank you all for joining. Thank you, Jason. I look forward to joining you on another occasion. So once again, thanks everyone. Take care.
Thanks a lot. Good work, Mark.